And wondered if I would survive, not physically. I was rather confident that physically one can survive almost anything, but in other ways. And so with a certain sigh of relief that I come to the 13th and that I have survived. But of course, I love it. I don't pretend really to understand it all, and sometimes when I speak with great confidence of what I think it means, it only means that that it's trying to cover up for that feeling of unsureness within, that have I really grasped it? And of course we never do. Every time we go through the Secret Doctrine, we come on new meanings, new insights, new understandings. But you've all been very kind as I've shared my ignorance with you. By no means an expert, except in the fact that an expert is usually someone who's 200 miles from home. And since I'm, I guess, perhaps 5,000 miles or something like that from home, well, I'm fairly safe. Until you read it all and discover your own meanings and say, I don't understand how she ever got to that. Well, that's fine, because then you will come up with your own meanings. But just to remind you what I have attempted to do in some very, very inadequate way is to focus on the process, on the cosmogonic process. And for that, therefore, have referred specifically to the stanzas of Volume 1. I think there are many ways, obviously, one can approach this. I remember one of the first times that I was asked to speak at our own convention in summer school on ways to study the Secret Doctrine. I shared the platform with Jeffrey Barborka many, many years ago. It was before the writing of the Divine Plan, in fact. And my view was that it was helpful to get a clear grasp of some of the fundamental principles underlying the cosmogonic and therefore the man process, the anthropogonic process. And I maintained that, and I think I still maintain it to a large extent. Whereas Jeffrey spoke very strongly in favor of getting the details of the anthropogonic process before approaching cosmogenesis, and felt that it helped to begin with the second volume, in other words. It was a friendly discussion. I mean, Jeffrey and I were always friends throughout the years, so it was not a rift in that sense. But it was just two, I think, quite legitimate points of view. And I think that there are many of us who do, our minds perhaps work in terms of, if you can gain the overall principle underlying something, that then the specifics somehow fall into place. And I suppose I have that kind of mind. I like to know in general how something works. I've just had a computer put into my office a few months ago, and the member of the society from Seattle, who's a computer programmer and who came down as our counselor, as it were, and guide and teacher into the mysterious and esoteric realms of computers, which I think really are, in many respects, very esoteric, kept saying, well, all you need to do, Joy, is just, go ahead as though you were on a typewriter and find out. And I said, but I want to know some of the underlying fundamentals of it. What's happening? Please give me the broad picture, even if you think I won't understand it, which I probably won't. But at least give me some of the principles by which all that I'm going to do can become apparent. And finally, he succumbed to my pleas and did give me a kind of broad outline, and then said, now I throw you into it to find the particulars, which I've had fun doing, I must admit. It becomes sort of I think one becomes a computer addict. I thought I'd never fall into that trap, but I think you do. Isn't that right, Adam? You sort of do. It's, you really get attached to the thing. And you really do, and you really do, and it's
the most horrible thing to have ever invented.
Haven't you given yours a name? Mine's called Monkey.
Well, I hadn't thought. Usually I name everything, but I name all the little birds and beasts in my house. I mean, we have a lot of. Virginia is great at this. Virginia Hanson. Virginia names everything, and then Virginia loves little. Ceramic things and wooden things of birds and so on. Some of you have been in our house, she has it. And we were beginning to get so many, so now she's gone around and she's labeled them all so we can remember. And I said, it's a good thing because I don't remember, Peregrine from this one and that one, and she's got them all named. Well, I usually do name everything, but this remains the nameless one. This is the nameless one from which everything emanates. You see. That's why I'm not naming the computer, because that then localizes it, and it's comprehensive. It can do everything. So it is the nameless one. I think that's much better, you see. I mean, it's already produced quite a few things, you see.
Mine's not nameless, I can take it.
That's why it's behaving the way it does.
Yes, you see. So, anyway, well, so just to remind you that this has been my approach. Now, as I say, I am not by any means convinced that it's the only approach, nor have I done it justice by any means. I debated a long time whether to spend the entire 12 days or 10 days, because I wanted some introductory things, which I did give you. And today, as a kind of summing up and recapitulation, I really debated spending the entire time on stanza 1, because I think that would be equally productive, in the sense that there is so much that can be explored there in stanza 1 that gives you everything that was not. And by approaching the nots, the NOTs of non-manifestation, one begins to assemble, and I use that word because it's one that I like. One begins to assemble all the elements of a manifested system, whether that system be a world, a universe, a man, whatever it may be, latent, even at the most tenuous levels of manifestation, is all that will be exhibited through the entire process, not in its particulars, but in its archetypal presentation, presentiments, if you like. And so I gave a long thought to that of spending our entire time on stanza 1. And then I thought, well, that's interesting, but let's try to get the whole process as it unwinds, as it unrolls, and then see it in its summary and also presentiment of the future as given in stanza 7. And so, as you know, I have chosen to give the greater emphasis to the final stanza, which in so many ways gives us this whole cosmogonic process in review very quickly, very basically, and at the same time presents us with the future. It's interesting, if you have followed at all this study guide which I gave you, this intuitive approach to the study, that on page 17 of this, the final exercise that is called for is dealing with the entire seventh stanza, and is a kind of pointing up who or what. We've used both words, who, what. I'm happier with the who because it although that may seem to personalize it, and I don't mean to do that in any degrading sense, but the what objectifies it, and there's so far to use both who and what indicates that it is not personalized as I, you, Tom Jones, or whatever, you see, but the what gives it that movement into an impersonal. And it's rather interesting to see what you would do with each of these. Who or what? Who what? Don't say or, but who what? Are thou, I, and he? Who what watches over thee and thy mother? Who what precedes form and survives the last atom? Who what is our thread? These are interesting to begin to see how you begin to gain a new insight into it. Who what is the root that never dies? Who what journeys through the seven worlds of Maya? Who what is formed from the combined attributes? Who what forms the thinker? Who what completes the thinker? Who what perfects the thinker? Who what becomes more strong and radiant with every change? Who what has clothed himself in the thinker? Who what descend on radiant earth and reign over men? Who what are themselves the builders?
Very good.
It's an interesting exercise, I think, that begins to move this whole process from an outer process to an inner process, an interior process, where we begin to internalize our knowings, our understandings, in a very deep way. And if I have encouraged you at all to do that, I feel that some success will have accrued, not to me, but to you in your effort now in making it your own. So I just call that to your attention, to give it that thought. Now, while in the letter that accompanied this, I asked that it not be used and distributed, I am quite sure now that it will be published by the American section, and therefore that it will be available, and therefore that you are free to use it as you may wish or may find helpful. But first of all, I suggest that you really use it on yourself, most of all. It's for you. I think that really it is only as we experience in some deep center of our being, in some non-definable way, these tremendous truths, that they come to possess us, and therefore we exhibit them. We then participate in them, and we know we're part of the process. So I would encourage you to do this. It's not just something out there. I feel that the value of a school like this, for example, the value of our books, the value of any situation, learning situation, is that all that can ever be done is to provide a kind of environment in which interior realizations can take place. Our books are an environment for us in which we come to grow, we come to know. Lectures and presentations and classes, and this, of course, has been very much this school has been this kind of situation rather than a more participatory situation. But these are environments in which something inside us can grow. I think it's very sad when we look at books as something that is simply repositories of wisdom, and so we take them down, we read them, and we say, oh, isn't that great, isn't that wonderful? And we put it back on the shelf, and nothing has really happened to us. Nothing at all has happened to us. Or we listen to lectures and say, isn't that great, isn't that wonderful, clever, all the rest of it. But nothing has happened to us. We take notes, which we never look at again. We say, well, I'll go back over those, but do we? We get caught up in our daily lives, and so there are the notes, and we think, well, someday, we're going to sort them all out. We're going to look at them and see if they spark anything in us. And we do. We diligently, I do the same. I diligently take notes. But what is living? What is really the life factor? This indeed is what that Tibetan text is all about, the matrix of mystery, is that it's a living, growing manner. Well, so much for my opening little lecture, but anyway, I'm sorry to get off onto that, but it's something I feel very strongly, I suppose, and therefore wanted to share on this final day. Now, in concluding this study, therefore, of the whole cosmogonic process, it's interesting that HPB then presents us with some 30 pages of a very fascinating, what she calls, summing up of the principal teachings as set forth as essential to this philosophy. This begins on page 269, summing up. And it's rather interesting. It appears, of course, from the notes that we have from Commander Bowen, that HPB suggested that one might study at least the numbered items in this section after studying the three fundamental propositions. But I'm suggesting that there may be a certain appropriateness now in looking at some of the aspects of this summary following our review of this whole cosmogonic process. Recall then the three fundamental propositions. I think they can be very briefly summarized, and I like to summarize them in this way as beingness, which she herself uses, being, and becoming. And I think in many ways that it effectively summarizes the three fundamental propositions. Three very simple words. Having a simple mind, I go in for simple words now and then. Except when we come to rhythmicity and some things like that. But yes. Well, first then, you see, the principle which antecedes all manifested conditioned being, one absolute reality, beingness. The principle of its periodic manifestation, while yet itself as the absolute, remaining untouched by all that displays itself, being. And HPB expresses this very well in volume 2, page 487. A marvelous statement there. It's wonderful how these statements suddenly come on you, as you read through the various volumes, the two volumes, the various pages. Volume 2, page 487. It's a very simple little statement. I think it's already been referred to by Ianthe. I think she's the one that referred to it. Didn't you, Ianthe? The first lesson taught? Yes, yes. the first lesson taught in esoteric philosophy. And as I think it was you, Iantheo, commented, it's amazing how often she tells you what is the first lesson, and the first, in the key to Theosophy, the first thing Theosophists learn. Has always amused me, because I doubt that it is the first thing that Theosophists learn, is the right relationship between the immortal and the mortal principles. Something like that is the rest of that in the key to Theosophy. And I rather doubt that it is the first thing that Theosophists learn, frankly, at least contemporary Theosophists. But in any event, here we're told that the first lesson taught in esoteric philosophy is that the incognizable cause does not put forth evolution, whether consciously or unconsciously, but only exhibits periodically different aspects of itself to the perception of finite minds. And that, of course, that process, as we've said, one of the principles that is inherent in all of this is what I've called the mirror principle, the principle of reflection. And really, if we think of ourselves as centers of causation, if you like, and I don't think that's a bad definition of each of us, we're a center of causation, as well as a center of cumulative effects, if you like. But we're fundamentally in our nature centers of causation. That's a nice little way of looking at it. Think of all that we cause in the universe, the ripples, you see. Then, as thinking of ourselves from that point of view, it is true that we too exhibit periodically different aspects of ourselves. You see, for example, you have seen 2 weeks. You've had to look at me. And yet that's only one aspect of Joy Mills. You haven't seen me in other aspects of functions which I have to perform as director of the Crotona School, or a member of our National Education Committee, or as a vice chairman of the Happy Valley School Board. You have not seen me in these other aspects. And if you were to conclude totally, you see, on the basis of what you have seen exhibited in 2 weeks, and you were to write now about what you know about Joy Mills, you see, it would be a rather limited, and, you know, if you presented it, for example, to my housemate, Virginia Hanson, she'd say, that isn't the Joy that I know, not at all, you see. Although she may know me in some of this teaching situation, but, Yanthi?
The president of Hodgepodge Lodge.
Oh, yes, yes, of course. Some of you have seen me as president of Hodgepodge Lodge, you see. And those of you who have not had that tremendous privilege of seeing me as president of Hodgepodge Lodge, which has had two phenomenal meetings here in the UK, in Great Britain, at summer schools of the English section. You see, I mean, you people from the continent have never seen me in that particular aspect, and I haven't brought Hodgepodge Lodge to Finland, you see. Let's try it sometime. But isn't this true, you see? So this is a reflection, always. This principle of reflection runs through the entire system. And I don't think we're always aware of how this runs through the entire system. So we can relate it to ourselves. We're not just talking about lofty, far-off events, either in time or space. You are the universe. Each one of us is. And all that is within the universe, in fact, all the planetary chains are met in us. All the rounds, all the races in terms of developmental stages. Some latent, some developed, some only partially so. But all of it is here. We are the matrix of mystery, you see. So we have to realize that these are not just concepts out there, convenient for study, and then we forget about it and we go about our normal tasks, as I was saying a while ago. And just we've put it in our notebooks and there it is. It has never affected us until you realize, wake up some morning with this tremendous realization that all of it is right here, accessible, therefore, immediately accessible
Inexhaustible.
and inexhaustible.
Yes, you think of all you've done this fortnight,
Yes.
given out,
Mm-hmm.
and yet you are in no wise diminished.
That's right. Yes. How do you know?
You can tell by looking at you.
Physically, no. Mentally, no. I mean, I wake up every morning and I'm refreshed and ready to go and say, well, it may be even easier today. These are all my friends. These are wonderful people, my colleagues and my dearest friends, you see, my family, because you've become my family, close to me, you see. And so this is true. We only exhibit periodically different aspects, and this is a reflection of that which takes place at the very highest level. So of necessity then, as expressed in the third fundamental proposition, that periodical exhibition occurs by means of a pilgrimage. You know, we all are pilgrims. It's a marvelous band, you know, what we travel with on this pilgrimage, in which consciousness is ever increasing. First, in accordance with the natural law of cyclicity, and then because inherent in the process is growth towards self-awareness by self-directed effort. Inherent within it. And so, within the framework of these three great principles, the basic principles, it is these which underlie the structuring of a cosmos, including, therefore, the birth within it of the one self-conscious entity capable of perceiving the process as well as furthering it, man himself. The centrality, then, of the anthropos. This was recognized by Plato, by the medieval philosophers, by the alchemists, by the Chinese in The Secret of the Golden Flower, by the Upanishadic writers in the dwarf Purusha, reflecting all of the universe, that self seated in the heart of all beings, the dwarf Purusha. This is reflected in all traditions, you see. So it's that structuring process that is, of course, detailed in the stanzas which HPB has given to us, and to each of which she has appended her commentaries that either confuse or elucidate the meaning, that sometimes bewilder and sometimes open up new vistas. But now in these pages she reminds us of certain facts essential, fundamental to this philosophy. And the importance of this actually lies, I think, in the simple fact that we begin to recognize the essential characteristics of this theosophical worldview, acknowledging that, therefore, while the interpretation of the teachings has wide latitude, and this is where we each have our own darshan, we each have our own theoria, our point of view, the way in which we look out upon the world, our own interpretation of the teachings themselves undergird in a marvelous structural manner whatever position one takes in the universe. This is simply, of course, to say that in the Theosophical Society and among theosophical students everywhere, there is indeed real freedom of thought, which I think is all too often simply interpreted as a liberty of opinion. But because for thought to be truly free, the mind must be released into new dimensions, a new consciousness, for there to be real freedom of thought, and not just a liberty of opinion. This is a cardinal principle. Well, as we turn to this section, which HPB titles Summing Up, it's interesting to note, first of all, 3 points to which I'd like to call your attention. She heads the section with a quotation from T. Subarow, one of the ablest and most competent occultists of her time, and whose work, of course, I've already referred to, 2 works, the philosophy of the Gita, which she refers to again and again, and then what was collected as his esoteric writings. The quotation which HPB uses refers to the fact that there are, or will be, 7 chapters in the history of creation. The 7th chapter not yet completed. And we may assume that that 7th chapter, therefore, is the growth of the man-plant. I think that in this we see then the reason why HPB has numbered these stanzas 1 through 7, even though 11 were omitted half midway through, or a little past midway through, and while great chunks must have been omitted from all she tells us. That is, she numbers them in the way she has to call attention to the fact that there are indeed 7 stages, 7 chapters that have to be fulfilled, whether it's within the life of man, whether it's in the life of the universe, the rounds, the rings, the races, so on, all of this. So we are talking about 7 major stages which are spoken of in the Puranas as the 7 creations, and of course in the Christian Bible as the 7 days of creation. The emphasis, therefore, seems to be that for our cycle, this number has a certain mystical meaning. But as I suggested earlier, it probably is 6 plus 1. Rather than 7 in its totality, or 1 plus 6, if you like. Now, the second point to note, I think, is her reference to the problems which I have been discussing throughout, the problems of language. And she puts it very clearly, the attempt to render in a European tongue the grand panorama of the ever periodically recurring law impressed upon the plastic minds of the first races endowed with consciousness by those who reflected the same from the universal mind is daring, for no human language, save the Sanskrit, which is that of the gods, which is what Sanskrit means, can do so with any degree of adequacy. One wonders that even Sanskrit would be capable of conveying all of this, if the sacred language is not indeed a symbolic language. Because symbols always point to a multitude of meanings. Signs point to just one meaning. There's only one meaning in a sign. But in a symbol, there are depths of meanings. Language, as we know, as I've emphasized, reflects to a large measure the development of consciousness itself. And it's also conditioned by the consciousness through which it is expressed. Now, of course, not all of us are willing to learn Sanskrit. We had a little bit of it from Beata at the end of our first week together. It appears to be the most philosophical of all languages, and exact translations of most of the Sanskrit terms are impossible to achieve. But it's my own feeling, and I have had a bit of Sanskrit, about 3 years of it, that one comes to develop what I can only call a feel for the terms. I never in spite of Sita's insistence, never really became fluent in writing the Devanagari script. That was not my intent anyway in studying Sanskrit. My intent was to get at some of the meanings of the words which we find in our tradition, the Theosophical tradition. And that's why I studied it. And I feel that you begin to get a feel for the words, even though they cannot be accurately translated. Even so simple a term, and I've pointed this up, I think, which is now in all our English dictionaries at least, as karma, defies exact translation. And there is a recent book which came to my desk just before I left, so I didn't really have a chance to read it, but it has Ernie and Rogel will be interested. It has an introduction by Dr. Coward. So from that point of view, Harold Coward, who is a member, isn't he, I think? Isn't he a member of the Society in Canada? So from that point of view, I felt, well, the book must have some credence and some meaning if Dr. Coward was willing to write the introduction. Would you say not?
Well, I listened to Professor Coward's lecture. I wasn't too impressed.
Weren't you? Oh. Anyway,
But that doesn't mean anything.
yeah. Well, I really don't know him. I've only had comments from Ted about him.
He comes across as a little too religious.
Oh, well, that could be. In any event, I can't remember the author of this book, but it's called Karma and Creativity. And I only had time to glance very quickly at sort of the first chapter. And he starts off by saying that the Theosophists have been responsible for muddling up the meaning of the word karma and getting it into this kind of mechanistic cause and effect. And that it really does not, and that the real origin of the word and its original usage and its significant meaning in Hinduism is not in any mechanistic term, deterministic manner. And I thought, well, this sounds very interesting, and I look forward to reading the book more fully. I'm sorry, I don't remember the author, but the title of the book is Karma and Creativity, and indicates that there is within the word, evidently, a creative potential, that it's not if you do this, if I hit you now, you're going to hit me in the next life. And, and I think we have made it very simplistic, that if you have cancer, you probably were a black magician in Atlantis, and, I mean, you get these things. We've gotten them, and it sort of has colored us that, my God, I better not give away what's happened to me. And, even so far as if you wear glasses because you're nearsighted, it's because you refuse to see the truth in a previous incarnation. So we have made it very much into this. Well, once one begins to sort of open up in the word, if I can say it this way, one begins to get a deeper and deeper insight into essential meanings of it. Well, then the third point to which I would call your attention concerns HPB's reference to the Upanishads, to which HPB now refers on this very first page, and to which, of course, Ianthi has spent considerable effort in trying to get us familiar with many of them. I think it's interesting, of course, that she should translate the word as the conquest of ignorance by the revelation of secret spiritual knowledge, since, of course, the term does not actually mean that at all, as you probably know. If you know anything of Sanskrit, it doesn't really mean that, but that's what she has said it means. It is, of course, from three words, upa, ni, shad. Is then that these three words really mean to, upa is near to, upa is by the side of, or to approach, or to attend on. But it's interesting that this word, you see, we have it also in, if you add to it another verbal root, we have also upadi. And this verbal root is the same. It's to come near to attend to that which nourishes, that which contains. To attend to. So even within the word upadhi, which we generally is used in one school for the vehicles, the upadhis, and HPB uses it at times. It's that one attends to the container, the nourisher of that which is within it, which is rather interesting. The more you look at some of these, you see. And so what is meant here is, of course, to go near to attend to the teacher, the one who can be the guide. Even Monier Williams, whose, of course, work in the Sanskrit dictionary, the huge one, is, of course, the standard work for all Sanskrit scholars, says that according to native authorities, it means setting at rest ignorance by revealing the knowledge of the Supreme Spirit. So, of course, HPB is quite correct in this. But the great Shankaracharya, to whom we've referred many times, Shankaracharya simply meaning teacher, guide, wise one, sage. This term charya is used very frequently. One time at the school at Adyar, someone began calling me Joy Charya. I said, for heaven's sakes, well, it's not. But there's a kind of reverence for the one who can teach, for the reverence for the one, a kind of respect for the one who is willing, not can teach, but is willing to share knowledge, is willing to sort of share an understanding. And in his commentary on the Katha Upanishad, asks, by what etymological process does the term Upanishad denote knowledge? This is now explained. Those who seek liberation, being endowed with the spirit of dispassion towards all sense objects seen or heard of, and approaching this knowledge, indicated by the term Upanishad, presently to be explained, devote themselves to it with one-pointed determination. Of such people, this knowledge removes, shatters, or destroys the avidya, which is the seed of all relative existence or worldliness. By these etymological connections, Upanishad is said to mean knowledge. Now, what is hidden in there is that the teacher is the teaching. And the clearer the individual makes himself, the more translucent he is, the clearer his mind is as the reflection, the reflecting instrument of wisdom, the more he is indeed the true teacher and conveys the teaching without any coloration, without any pollution, without any stain upon it. And so while it means to sit near the teacher, it really is that one approaches the teacher, the teaching. One approaches the teaching, knowing that it will remove, shatter, or destroy his own spiritual blindness. And so Shankara emphasizes this and refers primarily to knowledge, only secondarily to either books or teachers. And so while HPB devotes some pages then to a discussion of the Upanishads as books, what is hinted at is the fact that there is a knowledge, there is a knowing, which is obtainable only as one sits near the highest teacher of all, the Atman, which is Brahman. So ultimately, that is the teacher one sits next to. Hence, the knowledge is called Atma Jnana, or Brahmayana, and in the words of Shankara in his commentary on the Brahma Sutra, finds its consummation in experience or realization, since the knowledge of Brahman relates to a reality which is already existing. Marvelous. So what I'm suggesting is simply that HPB's references to the Upanishads are not only to that volume of literature which is the fourth side of the Vedas. Every Veda, you know, of the three main Vedas, and later came a fourth one, or came to be called the fourth Veda, the Atharva Veda, that each Veda has, as Yanthi has already pointed out, 4 divisions. The first division of the Vedas is the mantra, or Samhita, which are the hymns, the invocations. This is the first division of the Vedas. The second division is known as the Brahmana, which are the precepts for proper sacrifices, for worship, proper ways to worship. And the third is the Aranyaka, which are intended, these are precepts intended for those who have renounced the world, those who have retired. Aranya is the forest. Those are the forest dwellers. These are the people who have moved into solitude. The Upanishads, of course, are the fourth, the profoundest philosophical discussions. And so at the end of the Vedas come the Upanishads. And Yanthi has already given you this, so I'm only repeating what you already know. I trust you know. But I'm suggesting that while HPB is referring specifically to that body of literature known as the Upanishads, and she even refers, of course, to Samkaracharya as the greatest initiate living in historical ages, wrote many a commentary on the Upanishads, as indeed he did. The best known, of course, that we have of his works is, of course, the Viveka, but many other works, of course. But that what HPB is also hinting at here is that every student is to become a knower, that we are to approach, to sit near the ultimate source of knowing. And that's why we refer it, as I said at the very outset, to ourselves. Only you can know. I cannot know for you. I can never know for you, can I? I can never experience for you. Only each of us can know. And the ultimate knowing, to become a Gnostic if you prefer, it assumes meaning and significance only as it is realized in our lives. It has to be in us. It has to be really in us. To use a very homely illustration, very, very homely, mundane illustration, the heat of the oven is in the bread because the bread is in the heat of the oven. The knowing is in you because you are really in the knowing. So the heat of the oven is in the bread because the bread is in the heat of the oven. And that oven, that concentrated oven, if you like, is indeed the crucible of manifested existence. And that is in you. All of it is met in you. I've just said that earlier. Every element is present in you because you are in it. You are it. So this is what is being said to us, it seems to me, behind the words that she's using. This is what she's saying to us. And in the words of Shankara then, in his commentary on the Brahma Sutra, this Atmayana, the And he uses both of these terms. Or Brahma. That's out because of the J there. Atmanjana should give the diacriticals. Sita would be furious with me when I don't give the diacriticals, but anyway.
This is Brahmanyana and Brahmavidya also?
Yes, well, Brahma Vidya,
It's the same.
but it's in a sense. Now, Vidya is from another, Vidya, which of course gives us Veda. Vid is to see, to comprehend. But that still indicates a duality. There's a subtle difference. Jnana, jnana yoga, is the union where you know. I mean, knowing in knowing there is no duality, is there? There's only one. So it of course reflects itself in Brahma Vidya. Yes, that's right. But Brahmanyana, Atmajnana, is the full knowingness of Atman, which is Brahman. And it seems to me that's what she's telling us. And therefore, Shankara says it finds its consummation, this full knowing, finds its consummation in experience or realization, since the knowledge of Brahman relates to a reality which is already existing. Not something that's called into being.
You quoting that from the Secret Doctrine, George?
No, I'm quoting it from the words of Shankara. No, I'm bringing in some of the other things that I've looked up. Oh, but this is what I'm suggesting. This is what she's saying to us on from about the bottom of 269 through 270 and 271. You see. That she's not just telling us to read the Upanishads, wonderful as that is, but she's pointing to the fact, as I've already suggested because she refers to Shankara, that there is behind this directive to us to become the knowers. Now, with these 3 points in mind, we can turn then to HPB's enumeration of certain essential and fundamental principles. And it's interesting, as I think Yanthi's already mentioned, that she first gives us 6 numbered items constituting what she calls a recapitulation. But she obviously could not confine herself to a mere recapitulation, but adds a considerable amount of explanatory material now about those hierarchies of beings through whose agency the universe is worked and guided. So she proceeds to, in a sense, extract from all of this 5 what she calls proven facts. Well, there isn't going to be time to explore them all, but I'd just like to call your attention to them. In the study course that you have, we have even suggested some exercises on pages 18, 19, and 20, the final pages of the study course, that might be related to these. So let's look at them. The first point of recapitulation is indeed a substantive review of material she has given in the introductory section of the first volume. It's interesting that she begins her recapitulation with very much what she gave in the introduction, in which she assembled a great range of evidence to establish the existence of an esoteric tradition. And, of course, the words themselves, as you note on page 272, I think are very beautiful in themselves. The Secret Doctrine is the accumulated wisdom of the ages, and its cosmogony alone is the most stupendous and elaborate system. Further, of course, she emphasizes that this wisdom is the uninterrupted record covering thousands of generations of seers. And note, having just told us in the preceding pages, or hinted at in the preceding pages, that one has to become a knower, that one has to become a knower, that one has to realize this. The consummation of it is in terms of our experience. She now, you see, that sets the groundwork, really, doesn't it, for now telling us that this esoteric tradition is the uninterrupted record covering thousands of generations of seers whose respective experiences were made to test and to verify the traditions. This is the Upanishadic, the Kabbalistic, the Gnostic tradition. And it gives emphasis to what I've just said, that what is sought is not simply knowledge, but knowing. Not simply comprehension intellectually, but realization, experience. You see. And so it doesn't mean that since they've all tested it, you see, it's as though you're going to let these previous generations of seers bake all the bread, and you're going to eat it. She's saying you're going to have to bake your own bread, and it may be a failure a number of times. But having baked the loaf, you've got to eat it. That's the tough thing, you see. I use this because I'm not very good at baking bread. But this is what she's saying, in effect. Not only is this the result of the past, but she has just told us that the whole heart of the esoteric tradition is that you have to know it. And knowing it, you have to experience it. You have to realize it. It'd be so easy if we could just say, you know, well, I'm going to hang on to the coattails of whatever Dayan Chohan I can discover who's further along than I am, and I'll get pulled into nirvana on that score, you see, or into enlightenment or whatever. You know, work out your own salvation with diligence, you see. But she's giving us the consolation, of course, that others have done it, that these are not just ideas she's dreamed up, of course. And I think generally that's the way we read it, however, you see, is that it's just the accumulated wisdom, and after all, a lot of sages and seers in the past have been made to test it, so all right, it's been verified. And so we let it go. That's not enough. That's not enough. You see. We have to go through the same process. We have to know it. We have to really make our own effort. It'd be so much easier, wouldn't it, if we didn't have to? Isn't it enough that, you know, that countless generations have verified it, given us the evidence? Isn't it just enough, you see? But it's no fun, that's right. I think that would remove all fun from the universe. And this is a play. This is a play. This is the Leela, the sport of the gods. This is playful. You know, it's great. Get in there. All right. Make your mistakes, you know. All right. So we all, as I often say, you win some and you lose some. I used to say this when I was head of the American section working with a board of directors, you know. You win some and you lose some. You fall flat on your face at times and you pick yourself up and dust yourself off and keep going. You know, we've all done it. You know, we stumble and we make stupid mistakes. I think Jeffrey told me he'd made some mistakes. We do, you know. We
Very
make
humiliating.
Yes, we make some very humiliating mistakes, you know. And, you know, that it really is embarrassing, of course, dreadfully embarrassing, but, you know, and I have too. I've made my full share. I used to say when I was head of the American section, the problem was that when I made a mistake, 4,000 members knew it, you know, which is pretty awful. 5,000 members towards the end of my administration, you know, 5,000 members knew it. And so, you know, you stumble in public, and that's a little more ridiculous than when you're, you know, you're just sort of one of the masses. That's easier. I prefer that sort of anonymity, falling flat, you know, others. But, you know, when you stick up as a sore thumb, you sort of, you know, and then you make a mistake. My gosh. Do you hear it? You know, I'm sure. Anybody who's been in that position, isn't that right, Elizabeth? You hear it, you know. All your membership rises up in sort of, you know, one fell swoop to knock you. You know.
There's a passage thing in 273, 3/4 way down, or 2/3 down. Its impersonality is the fundamental conception of the system.
That's right, yes.
And the big blunder,
Yes,
you see, is to get identified in these matters with the personality.
with the personality.
And this knowing you're talking about necessitates, really necessitates a separation
Yes.
of our consciousness, our feeling of I-ness, whatever else, with that personality. That is fundamental.
That's fundamental.
Otherwise you
Yeah.
can't possibly know what Shankara or any of
Yes.
the others are talking about.
That's right. Absolutely.
No way.
No way. You're absolutely right, Jeffrey, I feel. That is the secret of it.
And there's the humiliation.
Yes.
You've got to give it up.
You have to...
A
Yeah.
precious thing.
My precious, yes, my precious little bit of, yes, that's right.
Don't then the failures become stepping stones?
Oh, of course, they all become stepping stones, yes. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't mind giving a lecture on that.
Yes. Well, the second numbered item from which Jeffrey was reading that marvelous statement, its impersonality, but reminds us that the fundamental law, the central point from which all emerged, around and toward which all gravitates, and upon which all is hung the philosophy of the rest, is the one, omnipresent, one principle, one omnipresent reality latent in every atom in the universe is the universe itself. I was interested in this connection in reading a statement not long ago in an issue of Scientific American, and I didn't write down who made the statement, but I copied out the statement. One of the fascinating aspects of biology is the continual rediscovery of evidence for the unity of all living cells, from the ubiquity of DNA as the genetic material to the presence in unicellular organisms and the cells of advanced plants and animals of the same intricate structures performing essentially the same functions. Very interesting statement. One.
Who made the DNA?
Ah, well, yes.
Who put all those
molecules in that order?
arranged their
Yes.
constitution?
That's right. Yes. Well, it's in this second one that she refers the student, you'll notice, she refers the student to what I think is one of the major sections in the first volume. It appears in volume 2 of the Adyar edition, but it's one of my favorite sections, and it's one on which I frequently give lectures in discussing the Secret Doctrine when I'm taking it up in a different order. And that's the section called Primordial Substance and Divine Thought. I think it's absolutely basic. I think it's a section that every student should read. It begins on page 325 of volume 1 in the original, and it's section 3 of volume 2 of the Adyar edition, some page or other. But it's in volume 2 of the Adyar edition, very near the front then, very near the front, page 39. page 39 of volume 2 of the Adyar edition. It's section 3. I think every student without any question should be forced to read this.
Volume 1, should say.
Volume 1, page 325. If you have the original edition, page 39 of the volume 2 of the Adyar edition. And this is an absolutely essential. It develops the whole thesis, and it gives us, indeed, on page 328, I think, a review of the entire process. The paragraph beginning, Manvantaric impulse commences with the reawakening of cosmic ideation, the universal mind, concurrently with and parallel to the primary emergence of cosmic substance, the latter being the Manvantaric vehicle of the former from its undifferentiated pralaic state. Then, absolute wisdom mirrors itself in its ideation, which by a transcendental process, superior to and incomprehensible by human consciousness, results in cosmic energy, fohat, thrilling through the bosom of inert substance. Isn't that a marvelous phrase? Thrilling through the bosom of inert substance, fohat impels it to activity and guides its primary differentiations on all the 7 planes of cosmic consciousness. From then on, we're dealing with consciousness, and there's a great deal on that. No manifestation of consciousness, semi-consciousness, or even unconscious purposiveness except through the vehicle of matter. So now the forms must be there to sustain the consciousness. It's a marvelous summary, the whole thing. And then on page 330, we have this consciousness, this focalized, localized consciousness as the ego, the Manasaputra within us, if you like, the Dhyan-chohanic presence, the top of page 330, that ego, progressing in an arc of ascending subjectivity, must exhaust the experience of every plane, but not till the unit is merged in the all, whether on this or any other plane, and subject and object alike vanish in the absolute negation of the nirvanic state. Negation, again, only from our plane, which is clear, is scaled that peak of omniscience, the knowledge of things in themselves, and the solution of the yet more awful riddle approached, before which even the highest Dhyan-chohan must bow in silence and ignorance, the unspeakable mystery of that which is called by the Vedantins the Parabrahm. There's the whole process, isn't it?
Unspeakable mystery, and yet we've got this whole book.
Yes, we have this whole
Talking
book.
about nothing else.
Well, I strongly urge you to read that entire section, that chapter, whatever you want to call it. It's really a wonderful one. Goes on through page 341 in the original edition. Doesn't take you all that long, but there is so much to consider in that. That gives you the basis of it. Yes, sir.
Sure. Can I add as a footnote
Yes.
that the footnote on page 329 gives a fascinating insight into the more particular way in which this process operates.
Yes, it does. Yes, on the
I don't
foot.
know why it's in a footnote. I think it's so
Why?
important.
Yes. Why she put this in a footnote? You see, it really belongs in the body of the text, and why she suddenly puts it in a footnote at the bottom?
Maybe it came later. So
I don't know. This thing. Read it on the bottom of page 329. Cosmic ideation focused in a principle or upadhi. And remember what I said about upadhi. She calls it basis, but it's much richer than that. Much, much richer. results as the consciousness of the individual ego. Its manifestation varies with the degree of upadhi. That is, or for example, rather, e.g., through that known as manas, it wells up as mind consciousness. Through the more finely differentiated fabric of buddhi, the sixth state of matter, resting on the experience of manas as its basis, as a stream of spiritual intuition. Yeah, that really belongs in the text. I agree. I have it marked, and it really belongs in the text.
From the previous paragraph beginning with divine thought were these whole 2 pages. The first time I read them, I had a very strong impression, for what it is worth, that it was not H.P.B. writing at all. And when we read about the way in which the Secret was written and the times when she was obviously occupied by someone else, it gave me that impression that these 2 pages were written by someone else. And they should, it seems to me, they need a cathedral pulpit to declaim them.
They really do.
Not just so that I strongly recommend that anyone reading them should read them aloud many times.
Yes.
And at first it doesn't matter if one doesn't understand, one probably won't understand. But to get the grandeur of the words alone, the sounds alone, is so out of this world, as we say. And so that could explain the fact of the footnote that although she wrote it, she or whoever it was wrote it, she may have felt, by this time back to HPB, may have felt that it needed a bit of explanation, which she dared to put in.
What pages are you referring to specifically?
From the previous page that I'm reading about Manvantric impulse. I go back to the previous paragraph.
327, page 327. Divine thought cannot be defined. Yes,
and
that.
I go on to that delightful little paragraph on 330. That is, after 2 pages of this, the passage that Joy has just read, the unspeakable mystery of that which is called by the Vedantins the Parabrahman, and then there's 4 lines which I think are quite delightful. Therefore, such being the case, all those who sought to give a name to the incognizable principle have simply degraded it. Even to speak of cosmic ideation, save in its phenomenal aspect, is like trying to bottle up primordial chaos or to put a printed label on eternity.
I quite agree with Ianthe. I think these are passages, this whole section from 327 through that on 330 are really inspired and therefore may well have been. One of the things that one does come upon, at least I feel very strongly, one very definitely comes on passages that you know were written by her teachers, one or other. Remember that the statement from one of the masters that, was it KH2 Hartman? No. Anyway, the Secret Doctrine, when finished, will be the triple production. That it is, it's in it's a letter, not in the Mahatma letters, but a letter from, I think it was from KH, the letter, to was it to Franz Hartmann? I can't remember now. Anyway, it's available. It's in the letters from the Masters of the Wisdom. That it would be a triple production, and that meant her two teachers, mainly her own teacher, the Master Maurya, and his brother KH, and Upasika. And it's interesting, they don't say of HPB, but Upasika. She was the one, Upasika, Upa again, who sat near to the knowing. You see, she was a chela. And this defines her very, very clearly in that word upasika. You see?
Yeah.
Again, she attended to, because not only is that to sit near, to approach, but to attend to. And she attended to the teaching. Well, I guess we better attend to coffee, or I'm going to... Well, in case you're interested, I've managed to cover 3 pages of my notes, of which there are 11 pages. This is what happens to me. But I'd like to continue a bit. Erica has just asked if I have thoughts of doing for Volume 2 what we have attempted in this study outline, this intuitive approach for Volume 1. And the answer is yes. It's a little more difficult. And right now I'm working on that at Crotona, very much working on Volume 2 there in much the same way. And in that connection, I have found it very interesting to note the reordering of the shlokas by Sri Madhava Ashish. I rather think that, however, it was Sri Krishna Prem, who was his teacher, who initiated the reordering of those 49 shlokas. This is found in the book by Ashish, Man, Son of Man, which is a commentary on these shlokas. And I've been studying, trying to ponder within myself whether the order as they have developed it, Prem died before that book was completed, and Ashish had to finish it. And I think Ashish is not quite the beautiful writer that Prem was, although he's a very fine writer and a very fine person. And I've never met him, but we've had a lot of very nice correspondence. And he was a very willing contributor to some of our special issues of the American Theosophist, Ashish. But Prem had died by that time. But I think it was Prem that, who was the teacher under a previous, another guru, but very fine system, that gave the key to a reordering. And in some cases, I think the reordering is a legitimate one and a very meaningful one, but that's what I'm now trying to work out. Because I think one has to, again, sort of make this inner determination and see it in a new way. And of course, as I already commented, I think early on, while HPB divides the shlokas of the second volume into stanzas, and she'll have stanza 1 and so on, I think that division is irrelevant. I must say it. To me it is. What is relevant, because she numbers the shlokas continuously. She doesn't go back as she does in Cosmogenesis, where under every stanza it begins with shloka 1 and goes on. She numbers them consecutively. And so, in many ways, I think what is much more relevant is seeing the 49 shlokas as a pattern, and perhaps reordering within them some that are given. Anyway, it's a very interesting study, and of course, much that Adam is drawing on right now is probably much more, of course, from Volume 2, much more the specifics, of which she gives the pattern in Volume 1, in this setting forth the triple evolutionary scheme. That's in Volume 1. But the specifics of it are there in Volume 2. Anyway, it's a point that I think every student has to sort of work out for himself, is my view. And I think it's fun when one can discuss it with other students, and that's what I enjoy, because I have no thesis that I am correct. And in fact, I think all students can be equally correct, if I can put it that way. You remember John Algeo, I think it was last Sunday, quoted something that I very frequently quote. I think it's attributed to Niels Bohr, that the opposite of a little truth is a lie. The opposite of a great truth is another truth. And that is, of course, what has been discovered in contemporary physics today and science, that the opposite of a great truth is another truth. And therefore, I think one has to really deal with these. I've been pondering these stanzas and shlokas for a long time, I must say. And some of you have said you were rather afraid to get into the Secret Doctrine. Colette said that she now has the courage to get into it. Two events threw me into it, if I can put it this way. Two events really threw me into it. First of all, as I mentioned last night, I was rather thrown out onto the lecture platform at a tender age, sort of feeling I'd been thrown to the wolves in my early 20s. And was because it was in the beginning of the war years, the Second World War, and we didn't have many lecturers, male lecturers, so Sidney Cook said to me, I think you'll have to start speaking. And this, of course, frightened me to death, you know, because while I could speak, and I had taken speech and drama at university as a kind of minor, not my major subject, but taken it, presumably I knew how to enunciate words and articulate, and, you know, I mean, the basics of, I'd taken, you know, all the speech work, and all of that presumably was qualified to teach speech. So I suppose on that basis, whether I knew anything or not, I was thrown out to the wolves. That is the public of the United States. And I arrived in the course of a tour in Minneapolis, one of our larger cities in the Midwest. I guess Adam visited it about a year ago or something like that, wasn't it? Yes. Anyway, after my lecture there, which seemed to be appreciated, or at least, you know, I wasn't shot, one of the older members came up to me and said, have you studied the Secret Doctrine? Well, at that point, I had not. I was, admittedly, a little bit afraid of it. And it wasn't, it was sort of in the era when there was still a bit of eclipse of the study of the Secret Doctrine, which I think the Society did go through, you know, very much. And so I said, no, I feel that that's a little advanced for me, and I haven't really gotten into it. And so he said, well, I intend to write to Mr. Cook, Sidney Cook, who was then the head of the section, you see. I intend to write to Mr. Cook that you should not be permitted to be on the lecture field till you have studied the Secret Doctrine. Well, that frightened me to death. I thought, my gosh, I'll probably be, you know, fired at once. And here I was working full-time for the Society, and immediately, you know, within a few years of starting my career in the Society, getting expelled for not having studied the Secret Doctrine. Anyway, I think the man set me to thinking, well, I better look into it, you see. And when I returned to headquarters from the lecture tour, we had a group of a lodge branch of the Society in Wheaton, separate from the group we had at Alcott, our national headquarters. And the head of the group in Wheaton said, we've decided we'd like to study the Secret Doctrine. Would you be our leader, class teacher? And I said, I've never studied it, so yes, I will. Because I thought this would really, you know, the best way to learn something is to be a class leader, to be a teacher. You know, it really is the best way whatsoever to learn something is to be a teacher of it. And so, knowing that, I said, yes, I will. And that began in about 1943, my studies concentratedly in the Secret Doctrine. And, you know, so you get thrown into it, you see. You get forced into it. And, of course, it's been a very rich experience ever since. So, you know, find yourself a group that doesn't know anything and say, I will be the class teacher in the Secret Doctrine for you.
Yes.
I think it's the best way, very best way you could do. I think every one of you should go back home, get a little group and say, look, I'm going to be your class teacher. We're going to take up the Secret Doctrine. And I warrant you, you will get to know it. It's the very best way.
The use of knowledge.
That's right. It's the very best way, because then you begin digging for yourself. You begin digging it out.
But if you can't find a group, don't give up.
Oh, no, don't give up. But even just take one other person and say, you say, you know. But don't give up even if you have to be all alone.
People are more interested in television.
Yes, but say, look, I've got a drama for you that beats anything that's on television today. You know.
You
say.
have not given the Secret Doctrine on television? Not yet?
We might. I think we'll come to that eventually. This will be portrayed. I think it can be. Why not, you see? So anyway, don't give up, but...
It's what I did at Dzyan when I found myself obliged to do something. And so I thought it was about time I studied the Secret Doctrine. So I offered to conduct a class
Yes.
in it. And we did volume 1 on Mondays, volume 3 on Wednesdays, volume 5 on Fridays, and we did the Secret Doctrine in 9 weeks flat.
Well,
and
great.
I don't think anyone has ever done it faster.
That's great.
And I learned a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. I think it really is the best way.
What I achieved was to destroy the fear of the Secret
That's
Doctrine
right,
in
yes.
the people who attended the
Yeah.
class.
Well, that's the whole thing, you see. I mean, after all, the book isn't going to bite you. Nothing's going to leap out, hobgoblins or ghosts or anything else. Nothing's going to leap out and sort of devour you. There are devourers in it, yes. But they're not going to really devour you.
I had this fear before coming, it has disappeared.
Good, you see. Isn't that wonderful? So I think if we've achieved that, Colette, we've done a great deal, you see. But, you know, it's only a book until you bring it alive. What a book, but it's you who bring it alive. It's you who do something with it. It really is, till you bring yourself to it, fully, wholly, engage yourself. Well, I'd like at least to go through some of these other points. We have an hour. These pages, which they're just some points that I want to really call to your attention. We sort of stopped on number 2, but the third recapitulation is indeed a recapitulation of the second fundamental proposition. The universe, it's very simple, the universe is the periodical manifestation of this unknown absolute essence. So it is, again, the second fundamental proposition. The 4th, 5th, and 6th numbered items are extensions of the third fundamental proposition. The fundamental identity of all existent things and the obligatory pilgrimage of sentient beings on their way to self-consciousness. I think if you can begin to see, because she calls it a recapitulation, that it really is saying in different ways, it is a recapitulation of what she has already given. And I think we think she's giving something new, but she isn't. So I suggest these 4th, 5th, and 6th numbered items are extensions of becoming. The first point to be noted, of course, is that in item 4, that the manifested system has been called, you notice, is called Maya. Now it doesn't say it is Maya, but it's called this. Because, and it's called it because everything within it is temporary. That is, that it is process. It is not a universe of static things, but it is a constant process. And it's been called this, therefore, because it takes on the appearance of stability. And therefore, as H.P.B. states, the universe is real enough to the conscious beings in it. In fact, it's only in the projected image that we begin to see the archetype. that which underlies it. And therefore, the necessity of appearances, images, shadows. From that, of course, we have item 5, the statement that everything in the universe, throughout all its kingdoms, is conscious. And that, again, is further developed in that section to which I've already called your attention, primordial substance and divine thought, and particularly that section to which Ianthe has referred as having undoubtedly been written by one or other of her teachers. I really do feel that as one becomes more and more familiar with the Secret Doctrine, that one can almost pick out sentences, paragraphs, sections that were not written by HPB, but that she knew. Now, when we say that they were not written by her, does not mean that she did not know. She was not, you see, this is a question that often comes up. Wasn't she just a medium then? You see, wasn't she just a kind of amanuensis for the Mahatmas and didn't really have much going on in her own brain? Well, this is, of course, utter nonsense. And that's why I call your attention to the statement of the Master that this is the triple production, not of the Master and his brother, the two Mahatmas, and HPB or H.P. Blavatsky. She used both, you know. We have it at Olcott, at our headquarters in the archives, that the wonderful first edition of the Voice of the Silence, which she gave to Dr. Buck, and which she also wrote, you know, from HPB to H.P. Blavatsky with no kind regards, which is a marvelous inscription. But there it is in the copy that she gave to J.D. Buck, one of the early members of the American section, from HPB to H.P. Blavatsky with no kind regards. It's a marvelous inscription. So she used HPB for this inner entity. But you see, the Master does not say in that letter that it's the triple production of himself and his brother and HPB, even, you see, or H.P. Blavatsky, the outer personality, but of those two and Upasika. A chela, but what does that mean? I've already pointed out the meaning of Upasika. Why did they use that word? Because she was indeed a knower, inwardly a knower. Even though at times, you know, and there's some amusing letters in the letters of HPB to Sinnott, where she says, I am made to see this whole genealogy of the biblical begats and so on. I haven't the vaguest notion what's going on, and so on. And you feel that she gets sort of disgusted at some of the things she's made to see or made to put down and write. That she really, you know, I suppose in an outward way, she, like us, become recalcitrant at times. You know, we resist knowing. We resist having to do anything about it. And I expect there were times when the personality sort of overwhelmed her. One can't blame her. She was still in a personality, and probably not an easy one to get along with. You know, I'm sure of that. You don't think of her as any angel or saint. You know, I think we have to be careful. Let's not deify her, but let's also recognize that she was Upasika. All right, so everything is conscious. And that's emphasized again in this section on primordial substance and divine thought, that there can be no manifestation of consciousness in any form except through a vehicle of matter. And then to emphasize the link between items 4 and 5, she adds, from the standpoint of the highest metaphysics, this is pages 328 and 29, this is still in that section to which I've called your attention. You see, from the pages 328 and 329, from the standpoint of the highest metaphysics, the whole universe, God's included, is an illusion, but the illusion of him who is in himself an illusion differs on every plane of consciousness. The pure object, apart from consciousness, is unknown to us. But the journey...
Where's that line? It's important.
Yes, it's a very important one. I'll get the exact reference. It's on 329, excuse me, not 320, 329. 329, about almost 3/4 down, the middle of that paragraph.
It would be an error.
From the standpoint,
Yeah,
no,
I got that.
from the standpoint, yes, it's right after it would be an error. From the standpoint of the highest metaphysics, the whole universe, gods included, and by that, of course, she means all of these energies, all of these Dhyan Chohans, the creative hierarchies, is an illusion. But the illusion of him who is in himself an illusion differs on every plane of consciousness. And we have no more right to dogmatize about the possible nature of the perceptive faculties of an ego on, say, the 6th plane than we have to identify our perceptions with or make them a standard for those of an ant in its mode of consciousness. The pure object apart from consciousness, there's that footnote you see, is unknown to us while living on the plane of our three-dimensional world, as we know only the mental states it excites in the perceiving ego. Marvelous statement. So, you see, it's interesting that somebody like Dr. Wheeler is calling this a self-excited circuit. The whole universe. It's self-excited. And what excites it is the images, the shadows. These excite in us the knowing that there is that underlying it. Consequently, the 6th numbered item follows very logically from all the preceding ones, and most especially from the basic principle that existence is one thing, to use the term that is there, but we're getting away from thingness, I hope, grounded in the one absolute, which is consciousness itself. Hence, the 6th item states, the universe is worked and guided from within outwards. This, incidentally, is a principle which I explored in some detail in a lecture I gave at our American Section Convention in 1980. And if you ever want to look it up, it's been published in the American Theosophist for the August-September issue of 1980. If you have available the American Theosophists. So this guided from within outwards, as we've already seen in our analysis of stanza 7, the man stage is central to the process. And so HPB adds, on page 274, man, the microcosm and miniature copy of the macrocosm, is the living witness to this universal law and to the mode of its action. So having said, you see, that the universe is worked and guided from within outwards, it is the man stage, man in his, as an archetype, that is we become the living witness to this law. Again, everything is within us. Because the entire system is one of and in consciousness, the process exhibits itself through a hierarchical ladder of beings. And so we have to begin to point that out. And hence her statement there on 274, the whole cosmos is guided, controlled, and animated by almost endless series of hierarchies of sentient beings, each having a mission to perform, and who are messengers in the sense only that they are the agents of karmic and cosmic laws. So we have then this concept that it's interesting, Dr. Harris Walker has suggested that space is inhabited by an unlimited number of interconnected conscious entities responsible for the workings of the universe, answerable for each event involving every individual particle. You know, many scientists today are making proposals that really are way out on the frontier. It's really incredible. Just quite incredible. But then we're looking at many of these hierarchies. Adam has led us into considering the Dzyan Chohans, the creative hierarchies. It's a marvelous system, inherently beautiful, isn't it? You see, agents of karmic and cosmic laws. Do not think then of the Lipika as, we do call them lords of karma. HPB herself uses that term, but they're not, sitting in some cosmic boardroom, handing it out, Well, I think Jeffrey Farthing's about due for this. Let's, send this down, and, and so on. So as Nikki was asking me about this concept of karma, we've made it so deterministic, so mechanistic, you see. I think because, again, when this concept was introduced into the West through the Theosophical philosophy, the concept of the universe was a mechanistic one. It was seen purely in Newtonian terms of mechanism. And so the only correspondence was that then of a deterministic, mechanistic kind of interpretation. You do this and that will happen, you see. And, and indeed, all of the early Theosophists referred to Newton's, second law of thermodynamics, you see, as illustrative of this. Well, today, it's not that the laws that Newton emphasized, the 3 laws of thermodynamics, do not operate, but they operate only in certain sphere. And underlying them, there is, you see, what has come to be the quantum theory, the Einsteinian theory. All of these have changed the thinking. And so we have to realize that actually this concept of karma, which is, of course, far older than its introduction in the 19th century in theosophical literature, really never had that. That was the only thing that 19th century minds could use for comparison. This is where consciousness enables us, you see, to move forward. And this is where we are so conditioned by our culture, so conditioned by our language, so conditioned by the whole environment of learning in which we've grown up, you see. And we don't realize the extent to which we are conditioned. And so it's very hard for us to break through to a more basic meaning of this word karma, which has in it, from this point of view, the whole system is karma in operation. That is to say, it is an exhibition, a creative rearrangement on the basis of all past systems, a creative renewal with all the potentiality of a reorganization that is possible for a new meaning, a new significance to emerge out of this system, which then, through this doctrine of the Sishtas, will become the seeds for another system, a whole nother Mahamanvantara. And I'm speaking in Mahamanvantaras now. You see? Why not? Why not, you see? But the same thing is true for each one of us, if we begin to see it. Instead, then, of saying, when this is my karma, as though some little cosmic brick has hit you, a nice little package has fallen on your head. And to neatly explain it, you see, as I've frequently said, some of you may have even heard me in talks, we always, of course, say it when somebody comes to us with a problem, you see. They're having problems, they're having difficulties. What would Theosophy do? You say, how does Theosophy explain it? And our answer, we're a batch of parrots. It's your karma, it's your karma, it's your karma. And we do it, we sound like a batch of parrots, don't we? In cages, you see. And that's how we come out, you see.
is there a book written in simple, I repeat, simple language that would help us to understand that?
No, I'm going to write one someday. But I think it will turn turn many people on their heads when they realize that it is not simply cause and effect. You see, it isn't. Now, we've interpreted it that way. And we've gone around, and it's in the biblical saying, as ye sow, so shall ye reap. It's the Newtonian second law of thermodynamics and so on. And we think we've got it, you see. We've got it. There it is. This neat little package, karma. Throw it away. Throw it at people. It's your karma. As I say, like parrots. You can't change it. You can't change it. It's rigid. It's tied up, and there it is. And it's only, of course, when something very dreadful happens to us. When something goes right, we achieve something. Do we say it's karma? No, I did it. I beat that little karmic devil. I got around him. I did it, you see. But the whole system is lawful through and through. And being lawful, creativity is possible. That's what's implied in it. There's a vast amount of meaning tied up in it. We haven't begun to explore it. I get so tired of these lodges that write in and say, well, we've studied karma. We had a lecture on that. I mean, that was our course, that was our lesson last month. Now we've moved on, you see, to reincarnation, which is closely associated with it. And next month we'll take life after death and so on. And now where do we go after this sort of thing? As though you've heard one lecture on karma, you've heard it all, you've seen one wave, you've seen the ocean, We haven't begun to explore these in depth. We haven't begun to even grasp them, understand them. This is the excitement of it, isn't it? I mean, it's a never-ending exploration. Never-ending. Inexhaustible, as Jeffrey said. Inexhaustible.
The church has said your karma is to be a sinner.
Yes, of course.
We reject that.
Yes. Yes, of course. You see. You can be whatever you want to be.
But the karma to be a sinner.
And it's fun sometimes to be a sinner. I mean, why not?
Sure.
To know it all, you see. Anyway, you see, this is what's being told us here. The emphasis is on the centrality of the man stage. And she states it very, very clearly at this point. You see, on page 275. Very clearly, in connection with this fundamental principle, which is the third fundamental proposition, of becoming. And therefore, she states it very clearly, for each of these beings, speaking of these hierarchies, who are the agents, each of these beings either was or prepares to become a man. If not in the present, then in the past or a coming cycle. They are perfected when not incipient men, and differ morally from the terrestrial human beings on their higher, less material spheres, only in that they are devoid of the feeling of personality and of the human emotional nature, two purely earthly characteristics. And then she says what is meant by personality being a limitation and a relation, or relationship, I think we might add. This is the middle of page 275. But individuality is the characteristic of their respective hierarchies, not of their units. There's very much that she gives us here. We haven't time to explore it all. But the emphasis which HPB gives at this point, and over on to page 277, she continues this. You see, in sober truth, I love that, as though she's been drunk up to this point. Now, in sober truth, as just shown, every spirit so-called is either a disembodied or a future man, and so on, you see. The emphasis which she gives here has already been expressed in the proem on page 17 of Volume 1. The pivotal doctrine of the esoteric philosophy admits no privileges or special gifts in man, save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit throughout a long series of metempsychoses and reincarnations. And I think there's a reason she has used both those words. It's not only through reincarnation, but this inner psychic transformation, which is metempsychosis. And I think that, you know, I have sometimes suggested that in one way then, as one sees the center of the concreteness of our being as the physical, that center of the physical, if you like, which is just a dot there at the moment, there is a process that is linear, which is indeed transmigration in its true form. It's the basis of transmigration, which she hints at in an essay which appeared in the Theosophist and then in 5 years of Theosophy, and now in one of the collected writings called The Transmigration of Life Atoms. I've forgotten which volume it's in, and I didn't bring that reference because I didn't know I was going to talk about this. But it's a very interesting, it's the only place that I know of that she refers to this. Do you know of any other place? It's the only place she talks about it, the transmigration of life atoms. Between that center and what we may call the psychological center, or ego, which, and I'm not now going through all the levels, you see, we've had that enough. You certainly are aware of them now. Physical, astral, prana, kama, you see, tamanas. All of this is indeed the process of reincarnation. So that becomes then that kind of process. But this is going on too. At this level there is a process which is, what's it called? I can't remember now what I'm talking about. Yes, metempsychosis. That's what I meant. Metempsychosis. Metempsychosis. That's where it should go. But this is a process that occurs at that level, influenced by buddhi, But then there is a process that, in a sense, links us, and she discusses this, links from that to Atma Buddhi. You know, we're sort of strung out here, you see, if you like. Kama, prana, astral. Yes, I better get them all in then as little dots. But these move together, and this moves in that direction, you see. And in a sense, this process is defined in Gnostic texts by a very interesting word, which is metanoia. I don't know any other word that comes close to it, but it is that it's a shift upwards from manas, the aroma of manas, into the monad, you see, which must eventually, it's my thesis, I'm getting more and more daring on this last day, my thesis must take place ultimately in full consciousness. In full consciousness. And then this stage is indeed oneness or enlightenment. So that we move, as it were, both in what we can call a horizontal and a vertical direction. And ultimately it must all be comprehended in that perfect man, man perfected. So, at least it seems to me, As I say, I'm getting more and more daring on this last day because I don't appear tomorrow, and so can be more and more daring.
Daring. Bold.
Daring. Courageous, you see.
Bold.
But in any event, that's a suggestion of process for the man stage. And that this is why she says, at the very outset, in connection with a fundamental teaching expressed in the proem, in connection with the third fundamental proposition, the pivotal doctrine, you see. She's not saying a central, but the pivotal, that is, moving on a central pivot of the esoteric philosophy, admits no privileges or special gifts in man, save though, having established, you see, that man is the pattern, the archetypal, save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit throughout a long series of metempsychoses and reincarnations. And this, of course, is now beautifully expressed on page 277. Every spirit is so-called is either a disembodied or a future man, as from the highest archangel, Gyani Chohan, down to the last conscious builder. All such are men, having lived eons ago in other manvantaras on this or other spheres. So the inferior, semi-intelligent, and non-intelligent elementals, all are future men. There is but one indivisible and absolute omniscience and intelligence in the universe, and this thrills throughout every atom and infinitesimal point of the whole finite cosmos. But the first differentiation of its reflection in the manifested world is purely spiritual, and the beings generated in it are not endowed with a consciousness that has any relation to the one we conceive of. They can have no human consciousness or intelligence before they have acquired such personally and individually. This may be a mystery, she adds, yet it is a fact. So the whole order of nature evinces a progressive march towards a higher life. Marvelous, you see. All of them. So it's, anyway, this is a suggestion. Leave it there for your... Now, with these numbered items, then, firmly in mind, this recapitulation, she next moves to points which she hopes to have proven. This is a recapitulation. And so whatever, therefore, has been this recapitulation, and she says, of course, you see on the bottom of page 278, this work withholds far more than it gives out. The student is invited to use his own intuitions. Well, I think we have to. And what I have shared with you is what has come as insights, at least, on some of this. But what has she sought to prove, then? What has she hoped by all of this exposition to have really proven to us? Here we have these items. And the first is indeed undeniable. This begins on page 279. And she tells us in a very short way something that is extremely important. The thing that page 279, it's right on the next page, so I think those with the Adyar edition, you're able to follow this fairly easily. The secret doctrine, then, she hopes to have proven by all of this recapitulation, by all that's gone before, that the secret doctrine, that is the esoteric philosophy, teaches no atheism except in the Hindu sense of the word Nastika. Now, this is an interesting term. I don't know how many of you have looked it up. So I presume that you may not have. So I will tell you about this interesting term. It is really from two words, na and astika. And this is a very interesting, I think, thesis. Why does she use this? You know, she brings in words now and then You wonder, well, what is she saying, you see? Because she's saying, in this sense, every occultist, and she said, we teach no atheism except in the Hindu sense of the word Nastika. In this sense, every occultist is a Nastika. Now notice this, and in the light of what I've said before about knowing, the term is a very interesting one. In Orthodox Hinduism, an Astika is one who believes in the existence of anthropomorphic deity or gods who can be propitiated by sacrifices. The verbal form is asti, A-S-T-I, which means there exists, or more simply, there is. So this is, of course, believes that not only are there deities, that is to say, formalized, patterned energies which remain existent. There is. You see, the root verb is asti. There is. There exists. So this is simply a believer that there's a God, an energy which exists, and that therefore one can worship, one can propitiate, you see, all of this. Nastika then, compounded from not, and astika, is then not one who is a believer in the orthodox God or gods. But astika also has the meaning of believing, a believing nature, a disposition to believe. So that it's one who, to whom whatever is said, he believes it, you know.